I have personally faced the unique challenges of living with arthritis while pursuing a career in STEM. As a student with a disability, balancing academics and health management can literally be an uphill battle, and that's why I'm so excited to introduce the STEM Without Limits Take a Paycheck Scholarship. Are you or someone you know living with a diagnosis of a rheumatic disease? We're so excited to offer 2 scholarships, each valued at $2,500, to full-time students who are currently on their educational journey at a Canadian university, college, or those enrolled in trade school programs as undergraduate or graduate students. We're on the lookout for individuals who have triumphed over their adversities, proving that living with a disability doesn't limit their dreams and aspirations.
If this opportunity speaks to your journey, don't miss the chance to submit your application before the deadline on January 30th, 2024. Your path to success in STEM is not defined by health challenges, and we're here to provide support and encouragement every step of the way. Applications can be submitted in French and English.
And to learn more, visit the link in our description today. Back to the episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not represent or reflect the official policy or position of the Take a Paycheck Foundation and podcast. All information shared is from personal experiences and does not constitute medical advice. We do not take responsibility for any statements expressed during the podcast. Take a Paycheck does not endorse any products or services. Any said products or services mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you or your condition. Please consult with your physician if you have medical questions, as it may pertain to your condition.
Hi everyone, welcome back to this week's episode on Take a Paycheck. I'm so excited to have Rachel joining me today. Hi Rachel, could you give me a brief introduction about yourself? Tell me a little bit about your education, your hobbies, your career, and what you've been up to recently.
Yeah, my name is Rachel. I live in Newfoundland. I'm 27. I'm currently a student at Memorial University here. I'm doing my diploma in epidemiology, and I have an undergrad in biochemistry.
That's great. I'm glad you're interested in sciences
Yeah.
and the health field. Is there anything that kind of inspired you to get into that?
Definitely the arthritis for sure. I'm really interested in the rheumatology aspect, of course. Just, having been forced into that kind of life, it definitely sparked an interest. Knowing more about what I have definitely was an interest for me, and the reason why I did the education that I did. And I've been in and out of hospital my entire life, so it's always been a big part of my life. So it kind of just made sense that that's where I headed.
I think that's the story for a lot of people. Usually either they go in 2 ways. It's one way the career path is based on their lived experience, and the other way they're I don't want to have anything to do with my arthritis, so I don't want to associate my career, my education with that. So it's really interesting.
It's totally fair.
Yeah, I'm also one of those people who also want to do something based off of my lived experience. So it's interesting to meet someone else, but I've also heard people be I don't want to do anything with that. So let me get away, which is, yeah, like you said, understandable. So you mentioned you're diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. When were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed in the 8th grade, so I was just recently 14.
Okay, so were you diagnosed with JIA, you would say?
Yeah.
I was also diagnosed in grade 8 with JIA. So lots of similarities there. What kind of led you, I guess, or your parents to go see a doctor?
I was waiting at the time to have a splenectomy because I also have spherocytosis, which I was born with and runs in my family. So my spleen was always enlarged and it had just gotten a bit bigger. So I was waiting to have that taken out. And then during that time, my fingers just swelled up. And that was kind of the only symptom I had at the time. So where I had all these other health issues going on, I didn't know if it was something related to that, and just kind of with everything I had going on at the moment. So I just kind of left it for a little bit because after my spleen was taken out, it actually settled for a few weeks. So I figured it was just related to that somehow. And then it eventually did come back. And then I started to get some morning stiffness and some pain in my ankles and things like that. So I saw my family doctor and he referred me to rheumatology pretty quickly.
Okay, wow. Yeah, no, same thing. For me also, because of my symptoms, I went to my family doctor, and then my family doctor very quickly also referred me to rheumatology. We have lots of similarities there. So, did you have any? I'm assuming you didn't have any like misdiagnoses or anything.
No, I was really lucky that way that it was pretty clear cut JIA. Like it was, morning stiffness, swelling.
Yeah.
So luckily it didn't take long for it to be diagnosed. I know it's not the case for a lot of people. So I mean, I'm quite glad that I didn't have that experience.
And then, were you surprised about your diagnosis? Does anyone else in your family live with rheumatoid arthritis or rheumatic disease?
My mom has a cousin who has it, but that's kind of the only one in my family.
Okay.
No one in like my immediate family and like none of my grandparents or anything like that. So it was definitely surprising. I mean, I was 14, so it was probably in one ear and out the other during that appointment. It was probably not me. I probably didn't really grasp it until like a few years in and things started to kind of really go downhill that I kind of realized just how like overpowering this is going to be and how it's going to take up so much of my life. Because at 14, I was already so used to being in a hospital and things like that with my spherocytosis. So it didn't seem like that big of a deal at the time. But definitely it surprised my friends for sure. I was probably the first one that any of them had heard of who was under, you know, adult age that had gotten arthritis. So it definitely surprised a lot of people for sure.
Because your mom has a cousin, did that help you in any way or not entirely?
Not really. I mean, they weren't, I don't think they were that close at the time. And it probably didn't, it has helped me now, like as an adult, and I've spoken to him about it a little bit. I think his kind of the way his disease is presented is a little bit different than mine. So, we've kind of connected on a few things where we've had in common, but certainly my experience has been a lot different than his. But at the same time, it was nice to at least have one person at that time that I knew of that I could talk to if I wanted to.
And on top of that, you also mentioned how you were surprised, but also your friends and the people around you were like even more surprised, I guess. And I think when you don't understand the condition as much, how would they even understand unless they have it themselves or like know someone that's had it for a while? So, how did you go about explaining to your friends at that age what this was and how it would basically change your life?
I mean, again, at that point, they were already pretty used to me having health issues and things like that. So that part wasn't surprising, but I mean, throughout junior high, which nobody's very mature during those days. So I mean, I was called an old lady like all throughout junior high. And it was kind of just this running joke between me and my friends. It didn't bother me. But that was kind of the only way we knew to really incorporate that into our lives. Because again, I was the first kid that they'd known, and same with me, I was the first kid I'd ever heard of having had it. So it was definitely it definitely took a long time for all of us, I guess, to kind of really grasp it, just because, we didn't know anything about it. We weren't taught about it. We had never heard of anybody like that. So the old lady joke was running for quite a while.
You've been through lots of different stages of your life where you've had different types of education, have met new people. So has that like explaining what your condition is to a different set of people changed over time? Like, has it been easier for you? Have you had different reactions? How did that work?
Yeah, it's gotten easier for sure. And especially as I've gotten older and more mature too, I've kind of taken it upon myself to learn more about it and to be more involved in telling people about it and exactly how it presents and all the complications that come with it. So it's gotten easier for me for sure. But again, that was really me taking that on to learn more about it. And certainly as I've gotten older and social media has grown, I've been able to connect with more and more people. Just kind of like this podcast, like I probably would have never connected with you, Natasha, if it wasn't for, social media and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely gotten a lot easier, luckily. So I've been fortunate enough to be connected with some people who are experiencing a lot of the same things, and it's gotten easier to explain. And especially as it's affected more and more of my daily life, it's a lot easier to show people when it's such a persistent thing that I have to deal with.
I also think social media has definitely helped me as well. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. I think when I was diagnosed, at least, and I think you also maybe resonate with this, like, there's not many people that you know that live with the condition.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I kind of got onto this whole side of like social media, but you constantly see like new people making advocacy and awareness pages or just like connecting with them. And like I've joined lots of different groups where like even research related, which we'll talk about later, but just lots of groups where I've met other people with the condition that I can just ask them like simple questions of like, this morning in particular, I saw this post about using a Ninja mini blender to cut your vegetables. And
Yeah.
I've been struggling to like find tools to help me do things like that. So I just
Yeah.
messaged, her name is Chronic Eileen on social media. I just messaged her being like, hey, like, do you have any other tips that you have? So it's just
Yeah.
like making those like friendships to just make things easier for you, I think is super helpful because not everyone will understand why you can't cut a vegetable or something like that, or you'll be in pain. So it's just nice to like have that support on social media, I find now.
For sure. Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about how explaining conditions to people has definitely changed over time, but I think also your symptoms probably changed over time too. Can you talk a little bit about that? Unless it's been entirely like the same, but I think with medicine it's probably different now. But yeah, tell me a little bit about how your condition itself has changed over time.
It's definitely changed. I mean, from the beginning, I only had a few joints affected and things weren't too severe. I was able to still play soccer for a little bit longer. Um, so certainly day to day, my life hadn't changed a whole lot. But definitely as things progressed and got more severe and harder to control, and my arthritis spread from head to toe, it's gotten a lot different and a lot harder. So like you said, like just cutting up like vegetables or food or anything like that became really hard to do. So I've had to ask family members to cut my food for me and things like that. Uh, Day-to-day things become really hard. There's been times I haven't been able to brush my own teeth. So definitely it's gotten a lot harder, but again, it's kind of also gotten a bit easier to explain and easier to understand at the same time. But certainly, as things got worse and worse, and for the first while, I thought that things weren't going to be too bad. I was able to, still do a couple of things I enjoyed. I definitely didn't expect it to get so bad. And again, I still, at that point, wasn't very knowledgeable about, you know, the symptoms and the possible severity of this disease. So it was really challenging to kind of figure that out, and it's still something I have to, deal with every single day and try to incorporate into my life and kind of work around. So it's still hard. But yeah, the symptoms themselves have significantly, gotten worse. The swelling has gotten a lot worse. The pain itself, I've ended up in hospital a couple of times because of it, so that it's gotten a lot worse. The stiffness for sure is another thing. Like there's a couple joints I have that can kind of get stuck in one position and things like that. So, there's been more and more things that have kind of popped up over the years that I've had to kind of work around. And especially with pretty much a lot of joints being affected from my jaw down to my feet, it makes it harder and harder when so many different things are affected because, everything is obviously connected. So, one little joint in my finger could render that entire arm useless. So it's gotten harder to control and to work around for sure. Yeah.
Wow, okay. So for me, it's kind of the opposite. I think, and I've heard different stories too. Like I've heard people feel, at least at first, I've heard people share that they had the worst symptoms, and then after a couple years, they just like went under remission. Or like for me, mine was like I barely could walk, and I was in so much pain. My feet were feeling so heavy, but now knock on wood, everything's been like way better, and I found medication that worked for me. So that just goes to show how different everyone's body is and their
Yeah.
reaction to the condition. Because for me, it's gotten like way better now, but I know people that it's gotten way worse, or they've gone into remission, or
Yeah.
developed other conditions. There's so many ways that it can just like progress and manifest into like different things, which is kind of insane to me. It's interesting that you bring that up because for me, it's like completely the opposite. But
Yeah.
I think, what has your medication journey been like?
It started off okay. I was started on, a couple medications that are pretty typical for arthritis, like methotrexate and a biologic medication. So I was on Enbrel first. And that worked for a couple of years. Like it settled things enough that I was, able to, again, keep playing soccer for a little bit, and little things like that. I didn't need too much help doing day-to-day stuff at the beginning. And then a couple years after I'd started that kind of regimen, the Enbrel stopped working. So that was for me when things kind of really went downhill and more joints became affected. The symptoms were more severe and it was harder to control. And I had a lot of trouble finding another medication to work. So the biologic is a big one, that, is kind of like the really Hail Mary, honestly, for a lot of people with arthritis. It's really kind of the big drug kind of category that can be a saving grace, really. And I had a lot of trouble finding one to work, which is incredibly frustrating because, so many doctors would say, oh, I'm really confident this one's going to work. And it just never did. So I tried 7 or 8, I think, after the Enbrel, and not one of them worked at all. So it was a really long process. And because it takes so much time, when you start one, you have to wait, usually typically about 3 months, see if it's doing anything at that point, and if not, then to move on. So that took a lot of time to find one to work. And then just when my symptoms were getting so bad and I was needing all these surgeries, it slowed down the progress of that too. So it wasn't until 2019, I think, early of 2019, that I found one to work, which was a brand new one. It was Rinvoq. So that one was the one for me. But there was so many others before that my rheumatologist would say, I'm so confident this one's going to work for you. Like, this seems to make the most sense for you and your experience and your body. And they just never worked. So it was really upsetting to continuously have that failure over and over again and to have things get worse and worse. But now it's pretty settled. I've had luckily very few issues with like side effects and things like that. I experienced a lot of nausea from the methotrexate, which is pretty typical. It's also used with like cancer patients as well. So that one, I ended up stopping that too. And that kind of also sent things like a little bit backwards. And again, I've found one to work. So they replaced it with another drug called leflunomide, which is actually even better because it's not an injection. It's just a pill, which is great. So yeah, there's been a lot of change in my medications for a lot of years. Luckily now things have been pretty stable. So I'm lucky that way, where I've kind of finally found kind of the perfect combination to work. But certainly for a long time, it was incredibly frustrating and really hard to find something that would help me.
Yeah, I think also your joints probably like progress to be worse in terms of like symptoms and stuff with
Yeah.
that constant trial and error because I also like I think it was only till 4 years ago I found something. For the 4 years before that, it was just I didn't find anything. And so it was definitely frustrating because you also feel very hopeless and then you try to find like other things that could potentially help you. For me, my parents were doing research and they were trying to see, okay, is there like a specific lifestyle change you should make? Should we go see a different type of doctor, a holistic approach? And it's just like you try so many things because you're so desperate because there's no answers.
I
Like,
know, I did the same thing. I was really like hesitant to the holistic thing, and it just kind of wasn't something I ever really thought could work. And then, you're just like your parents, like my mom became so desperate trying to find something to work. 'Cause obviously it's hard for them too to watch their kids go through all that stuff.
so for methotrexate, you did experience like the nausea side effect. And I'm wondering if there were any other side effects that you experienced on any of the medications that you were on.
Not actually, like, no, actually, that was something I was really fortunate to not have to deal with very much. The methotrexate and the nausea was really the big one for me. I was always a little bit nauseous taking it. And then as I was on it longer and longer, the nausea just skyrocketed one year, and it just kind of got so bad I couldn't look at anything the same color as it. I couldn't even do the injection myself, so I had to have somebody else do it for me. I couldn't smell like the alcohol swab. It was so bad. And so it really started to affect everyday life for me, because I would take the injection one day of the week, and for the entire week, I'd be nauseous. So that was the big one for me, and luckily the only one I've ever kind of really had to deal with.
I mean, that's good to hear that you're off of that now. I'm on it still, and I do kind of feel the nausea. And I remember one time I like took it without eating anything, sort of like smoothie or juice or something before. Like that's the only thing I consumed, and then I had it, and then I literally like was so nauseous. I like puked and like it was disgusting, but it happened. And after that, I'm like, okay, I can only take it at nighttime because then I can go to sleep. It's just like a lot of planning around it. And I really wanted to get on the pills instead. And so I did get on them. And then I had a huge flare up because I guess it doesn't absorb as well in your body. So it was just not fun. And then I had to start back from the ground level, which is sort of what you mentioned about the medications that you were on. I was actually getting to, I think at first when I was getting to methotrexate, I take like sulfasalazine and Plaquenil, so 3 of them together. And I started off with like 25 mg for the methotrexate, and then I went all the way to 17.5, which is like on the very like lower end of the dosage that you can take. And then I decided to switch to pills, and then I flared, and then now I'm back to 25 mg, and I've been on 25 mg for like a year. It's just frustrating because I feel like if I didn't make that change, I would have been maybe okay. I feel like it's always just like trying different things and seeing how your body reacts to it, which is not helpful from like a patient point of view because just like trying different things. I don't know, it just I guess not only like our physical well-being, but also like our mental well-being, like not great either.
I know. I remember actually you just reminded me that I had tried the methotrexate pills at one point too, because I was so sick of the needles and the nausea, and it didn't come to high enough of a dose for me. But I still wanted to try it because it was such a big thing that was impacting my life that I really wanted to see if that would work for me. And again, it didn't, so it sent me into a flare, and it was so bad. But it was something I kind of like needed to try mentally, I think. And
Yeah.
fortunately it didn't work, but you know, sometimes it's like you said, it's the mental aspect. Sometimes you just kind of need to figure out if something better can work, even if it might make things a little bit worse. But there is, again, sometimes that regret where you're kind of wishing that you didn't do it later on.
Yeah. And I think also for methotrexate, just I remember my doctor was like, would you really rather take 10 little pills? Because I think it was like 10 or something, than an
Yeah.
injection. And I'm like, yes, I really would.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm taking so many pills. Like, yes. But a lot of people
I
also
know.
are on the opposite end where they don't want to take a pill and they just want an injection, which is crazy to
Yeah.
me, but I guess it's a personal preference for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I couldn't even swallow pills when I was diagnosed, so I had to like learn how to do it. I was
Oh,
14.
me neither. I struggled. I remember like my grandma used to take a banana and like try to put like a pill inside that I would eat it and then something would happen. And
Yeah.
I think I was in Myrtle Beach. Everyone was kind of chasing after me to like try to make me swallow a pill. I don't think it was right before my arthritis diagnosis. Like they were like, I don't know, maybe someone was predicting it. They're preparing me to like swallow a pill. I think I had like some other issue at that point, but they would like try in a banana, try to crush the pill. Like, oh, it tasted so bad. And then one day, like my grandma just like magically like did something and I swallowed it. And then I got diagnosed with arthritis 2 months later, which is like crazy to me, but it actually like helped. I wish I was not diagnosed, but you know what I mean? Like it just definitely like helped that process.
Yeah, they ended up giving me like this little special cup they give to kids that got like you put the water in the bottom and then the top goes on and there's little like grated kind of little thing underneath like the
Oh,
little spout. So you put the pill in the spout. It stays like at the top though. So when you pull it back, the water like flushes it down your throat, I guess. It
that's so
actually worked for
interesting.
me, but no, before then I couldn't find anything.
That is very interesting. That's a great tool. I had no idea about that, but maybe if anyone else is sort of struggling to swallow pills, that's something that you can look at online. Were you always born and brought up in Newfoundland?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so I'm assuming you also had to like transition care from like pediatric to adult rheumatologist. How did that process work for you?
That was all right. Actually, my pediatric rheumatologist was so sweet and I loved him and he kept looking after me until I was about 19 or so. So even after I made the switch, he made sure that he was still available for me, you know, during that whole transition until I was settled with my adult rheumatologist. So that was really great and I'm so glad he did that. because the first one I was referred to, I had a lot of problems with. He just kind of was not the right fit for me at all. So I'm quite glad I still had somebody that I really did like and connect with and was able to rely on. I still had him, which was great. And then, eventually I had to move on from him completely, which was a bit like kind of nerve-wracking, I guess, just where I was so used to him and he was there from day one. So it was a bit of a transition. Like it was a bit hard. And I was kind of stuck with this rheumatologist, the adult one that I wasn't quite fond of for a little bit of time. Luckily, I was able to make a switch and get to see a different one the way I love and treats me very well and takes care of me. So that was great. But certainly transition is weird and it can be pretty challenging actually. Yeah.
I think also it's a concept that a lot of people don't know about when they're diagnosed. Like I had no idea that this had to happen.
I know, I didn't even think about it until like it was, approaching. I was probably 16, 17. He was like, one day you're gonna have to
Get out and see someone else. That's so interesting. Yeah, no, because for me it was a bit different. My doctor actually never talked to me about transition, and it was only through my podcast and people that I talked to I learned that this was a thing. And I think when I was 18, I brought it up. I don't think she really mentioned it. She was like, okay, like I think when I did mention it, she said she keep me to like 1920, like whenever I'm prepared and want to, but you never brought it up. So I didn't actually know that I had to like do it or leave or anything.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think every rheumatologist has their own way of presenting it to their patients. I guess we talk a lot about when we see rheumatologists, shared decision making, a patient-centered approach. Have you ever had any like trouble or struggles with making sure that the decisions are made together or making sure that it's very like patient-centered?
Yes. So like I mentioned before, the first rheumatologist I was sent to as an adult was just awful. Like he did not even look me in the eye. He didn't seem to care about me or my day-to-day life or, my mental health at all. He kind of brought me in, was rushing me out the door. It was really awful. And it was such a horrible time for me because that was when, my medications stopped working and things weren't doing as well. So things were really kind of progressing and getting worse. And to have to go in to see this person who's supposed to be trying to help me and do everything they can to make my life better, to not have him even look me in the eye and to be mumbling and to be quickly rushing me in and out and be so close-minded to all these different questions and ideas that, my mom and I would look into ourselves because we didn't feel like he was going to do that for us or things like that. So we would, on our own time, especially my mom would look into things herself and bring those to him and ask questions. And he would just be so close-minded. He'd, shut it down real quick, wouldn't explain things to us. So that was really frustrating. And it was very damaging, I think, to my mental health and the way that I pictured my life going forward after that. Because with this person who's supposed to be so knowledgeable and empathetic to me, to really feel like he doesn't care at all and doesn't have any plans or, things that I can try was very unsettling and really raised a lot of questions and stress and anxiety for me because I didn't know what things were going to look like going forward. It just seemed like there was no options for me. So definitely, having a rheumatologist or just, even a family doctor or anybody that will be willing to consider you, your life, the things you want out of life, and, trying to help you get all of those things that you can make a huge difference. And luckily my rheumatologist now is the complete opposite of that other one. He's, he listens to me. He, knows the things that I want to do in life and how it's important to me and why it's important. And he's very, he's very strategic in the way that he comes about my treatment plan. Like he'll suggest things if something needs to be switched, or changed or tweaked or anything. He'll always kind of have a backup plan, which is great because I always get very anxious about, trying something, especially where I went through all of those horrible failures of the biologic medications and things like that where nothing was working. I found now that if I have to try something new, having a backup plan, or at least, you know, the ability to come in and discuss next steps and feel comfortable doing that is really something that is important to me. Not having, expecting, I guess, the worst is something that really kind of came about after all those failures and things going so downhill and being so bad. So expecting the worst is kind of something that just automatically happens to me now. It's just very anxiety and stress inducing. So with this rheumatologist, it's great because he will always say, we can try this, and if that doesn't work, we can try this. Or, if it doesn't work, don't be discouraged. Like, we can always find something else to try or look into at least. Like, so it's very different, and it makes a huge difference for me, not just with my arthritis, but with my mental health and just day-to-day life. And finding a little bit of like hope again is great, because I definitely didn't feel like that with other rheumatologists I've seen. So it's great that now I have that, but certainly it's very damaging to a lot of patients. And I know I was lucky enough to be able to switch to somebody else, but that's not always the case for people. And sometimes they're stuck with a rheumatologist or a doctor who just doesn't fit with them at all, and it doesn't help.
I think the other thing is that you mentioned damaging, and I think people can take it in a different way. Like, if they haven't had the best treatment, or I guess the best doctor per se, they could eventually just stop seeing their doctor. And
Mhm.
then that could also lead to like worse symptoms and not being taken care of. So that's just like one other thing that patients can do based on their experience with their doctors. So doctors probably don't want that. So I think it's important to make sure that it's patient-centered care, shared decision making, like all these things are sort of put into place. And yes, providing hope is so important. For me, I don't have a parking pass, but I know I've talked to lots of other people that do, and they still are like, should I use it? Like, I'm
Yeah.
kind of scared. Also, I've had people that actually have received comments and been sort of, I guess, people have come towards them and be like, you don't deserve this, different comments like that. So it's still such a tricky subject. And hopefully we can raise more awareness that young people also get disabilities and chronic illnesses. But I think because it can be very invisible, people still won't believe it. So it's very hard, but I always think like, okay, if you have it, like, you shouldn't care about what other people think. But I find that it's still challenging.
Yeah, it's easier said than done for sure.
Yeah.
And, especially us young people who, don't look like we need things like that, or even, day to day, we get very used to being in pain. So we can very easily hide that and, make it work for us. So there's days where I could walk and somebody who is none the wiser can see me and not think that anything is wrong. And I'm really in an incredible amount of pain. I've just been like that for 14 years. So I'm very used to it by now. But yeah, I've had people comment on me using the parking space and stuff like that. I've had people bang on my window and, tell me to get out of the spot. And I have my permit is always displayed on my windshield, like it's never hidden. So, for them to not even look, I hadn't even gotten out of my car yet. So they really had no idea what I looked like from, my head down. So yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. And, I can kind of understand where they're coming from. They think that they're doing, I guess, the right thing, trying to, make sure the right people use the spot. But again, they just need to be more educated on, the wide range of disabilities and illnesses that can affect such a wide range of people from, any age at all. So, I think that's why it's such an important thing for me, I think, to, talk about my experience and the things that I deal with. And chronic illness and disability and accessibility are such big topics that, people just aren't knowledgeable enough about to really say anything about them, really.
So let's talk a little bit about your initiatives and interests and sort of like what you've been up to recently and in general, like volunteering and things like that. So you were a volunteer with Patient Partners in Newfoundland and Labrador. Can you talk a little bit about your role, what this group does, and what did you actually learn from this experience?
Yeah, that was a group here in Newfoundland, made up of volunteers that live with arthritis or like a rheumatic disease of some sort. Um, so there was about 4 or 5 of us, I want to say. The other ladies were much older than me, so it was great for me to be a part of it personally, and I think just for the group in general to have somebody on the younger side be involved with it. So what we would do is we would go see, med students, nursing students. I think we saw pharmacy students or physio or something like that too. But definitely the nursing and the med school for sure. We would go see. We would take turns kind of talking about our experience, the things we've been through, what our arthritis journey has been like, and the challenges that come with it. And then we would help them with the MSK exam, so the musculoskeletal exam that they have to do, which is super common for arthritis and other diseases like that, where you have to look at all the joints and stuff. So we would kind of help them with that. I mean, we weren't doctors, but it was something that we've had done hundreds of times to us. So we kind of knew what we were talking about. We would also be able to help them find alternative ways to do something. Like if one of our joints was really bad that day, you probably wouldn't want somebody cranking on it and seeing how it bends and moves, when that can be very traumatic for a lot of patients. Because there are doctors out there who, despite you being in pain, will try and do the exam as if you're not in pain or don't have any of the symptoms. So for them to be able to learn from us and to practice on people who actually have these diseases, I think made a big impact, because sometimes when they're in their school and doing their training, they're not always using real patients who have these real conditions. So again, they're kind of being educated and taught in a way that's not realistic, because they're not typically going to have patients who are perfectly fine needing an MSK exam. So that was a really big thing for us. It was really great to be a part of that, and to hear feedback from the students that would tell us that, they never really thought about that, or they didn't really think that joints could be affected in that way, despite their training and their education. When you come face to face with it, it's a different story for sure. So that was a really great thing I was happy to be a part of. It unfortunately isn't in the works now anymore here in Newfoundland. I think we had a couple of the ladies who were dealing with some issues with their health that it just wasn't feasible for us to kind of continue doing it, unfortunately. But for the time that we did it, it was great to be a part of, and I think it really did help.
Yeah, that sounds like a very interesting and cool experience. I think as a patient to like feel like your voice matters and you can actually have an impact on like, I guess I would say you're still an expert because you are the people that live with it. So like being that expert in the field in a way of like lived experience and providing that so that they can be educated. I think that's so important. So that's such a great experience. I actually learned a lot from that. I think that's so interesting. And I hope that people actually do that in the future and do things like this because it shows you real life examples. Like you mentioned, I think that's like the best way to learn. I wanted to end off the podcast episode with an advice segment. What would you say to individuals who are having trouble finding their identity after being diagnosed with a chronic condition?
To be honest, I'm still struggling with that myself and how to figure all that out. I think it's important to educate yourself on, your own disease and things that you will have to deal with. I think it's important for the people in your life to be educated on it as well. And because you're never going to be able to live with something like this by yourself, it's just impossible. And I'm fortunate enough that I have people in my life who are willing to help me and will do anything they can to help me. I know that's not always the case for people. But I think reaching out to people, that's the great thing about social media these days. You don't have to be in the same place. You don't have to be in the same country to be connected with somebody who can help you like that. So speaking to other people who know the things that you have gone through, it might not be the exact same experience, but you're able to relate to each other in a way that you just can't with anybody else. So I think it's important to connect with people like you and who experience a lot of the same things that you do. Kind of just talking about it in general too, talking about your experiences and the things that are hard for you, not just physically, but mentally as well, which for me was the really hardest part of it for such a long time. I was always so terrible at communicating my feelings and how I was doing, mentally. So after a while of, struggling so hard and not knowing where to turn next, that was a big thing that I had to learn how to do. So, I see a therapist now, I talk to my friends, I do things like that where I just kind of get stuff off my chest. And then, if I need feedback, I can get feedback. And then just kind of, even finding new ways to be involved in the stuff that you like, whether or not it's the same way. Like I can't play sports anymore, but I can still be involved in it in some way, like through the kids I work with in my after school program or just in my day-to-day life. Being involved in it in some way, even just watching it on the TV is, kind of therapeutic for me. It's kind of nice to be able to see people do it. So it is really hard though. I mean, I struggle still so hard with finding new things that interest me and to kind of be okay with the fact that I can't do a lot of the things that I expected I'd be able to do at this age or, later in life. I never thought that so many of the things I love doing would just be completely off the table. So it is really hard to kind of let go of this life that you thought you were going to live. And, that's still something that I struggle with every single day. But it's again, in talking about it is so important. And, I kind of take this, stuff that life has thrown at me and do my best to kind of use it for something better. So, my, awareness for accessibility and disability and, adolescents with arthritis, just things like that are new ways for me. They're different, but they're new ways that I can do something that I enjoy doing, that I find important and that can help other people. Again, it's not what I expected to be doing and spending my time doing, but it's a new way that I can turn my life into something that I actually enjoy and am proud of.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining me on today's podcast episode and sharing your experience with JIA. We started off the episode by talking about your diagnosis journey, how it affected your social life from elementary school. Then you discussed your medication journey and the side effects with those medications. We talked about your experiences with different rheumatologists and how they've provided patient-centered care. You also talked about accessibility aids and also like identity post-diagnosis. And last but not least, we discussed your contributions with Patient Partners in Newfoundland. So everyone, make sure to check out Rachel's social media channels, which I will link down below. Like, comment, and subscribe. Share this episode, and I will see everyone in 2 weeks on Take a Paycheck. Thank you so much, Rachel. Bye.
For having me.
I can't hide, 'cause growing pains are keeping